everyone, welcome to Zonan Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. Joining me today is Dave Merrill. Dave runs various blogs, notable blogs, including Let's Anime and Stupid Comics. He's one of the founders of the convention Anime Weekend Atlanta, and he's also responsible for Anime Hell, which I still have not. No one has ever given me a really comprehensive explanation of what Anime Hell is, but I understand it is very much worth your time if you can ever catch it.
Hello up there in podcast land.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
This episode will be another retrospective on an anime series that has had a unique cultural impact in Canada. And it is the first episode focusing on a show that is of enormous specific cultural relevance to French-speaking Canadians. Previously, we've talked about shows including Sailor Moon, Inuyasha, Beyblade, and I just have to make a quick note. It was brought to my attention recently, and I was unaware of this before we recorded the Beyblade episode. It is canon in the Beyblade universe that Moses parted the Red Sea using a Beyblade. This showed up in some montage, or some historical montage in a later episode, and I am kind of upset that in all the research I did on Beyblade, nobody mentioned this.
Certainly going to make next Passover a lot more interesting.
No kidding. Yeah, I guess it's just a lesson that when I do a retrospective on a show, I should watch the whole thing, because an in-universe fact like that is absolutely worth bringing up, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that it was mentioned in this episode so that anybody who needs to, analyze the importance of Beyblade in the future goes in knowing all about that. Just wanted to throw that out there. But back to the topic at hand for this episode. Those are all shows that have had an impact on Anglophone audiences. The Francophone anime fandom in Canada has a completely different history, is grounded in a completely different culture and completely different programs. And today we will be talking about one of the most influential anime programs to air on the French version of CBC, Radio-Canada, Albator, Les Corsaires de l'Espace, which English speakers are more likely to recognize as Space Pirate Captain Harlock. Now, I asked Dave to join me because he is quite well-versed in Harlock and the works of Leiji Matsumoto, and he has encountered a number of things related to Harlock in general and related to the French fandom. Notably, I really wanted to have someone on this show who actually lived in Quebec and grew up watching Albator to share their experiences, but unfortunately all of my attempts to find anyone fell through. I was going to keep looking, but honestly, we're 33 episodes into this podcast, and the fact that we still have not put together a full episode talking about the Francophone fandom is frankly kind of embarrassing. So we're just going to have to press forward with this as best as we can with just the two of us, and I think we'll be okay. What do you think, Dave?
I think it'll work out fine. I hope to enjoy the later episodes about Candy and Goldorak.
We will definitely have episodes about Candy and Goldorak. There's definitely a gap that needs to be bridged between the English fandom and the French fandom in Canada, because so much of the French fandom operated in the late 70s to the 80s, the early 90s. It declined, around 95, 96 when World Masterpiece Theater ended, which is kind of interesting because Sailor Moon started in 1995, which sort of marked the beginning of the English language fandom in Canada. So as one declined, the other sort of grew. I really can't give you a reason why that is, or my entire account of that might not be too accurate. I know that you've made some observations about this as well, Dave.
Well, it was, it's interesting that when I got up here, I moved to Canada in 2004, and it really seemed to me in English Canada, anime fandom really started with Sailor Moon. But there had been so many great shows that aired in Quebec and in French language Canada, well, all over Canada, but in French, that the fandom really didn't stick. It's fascinating to me. And I was thinking that it might have been because if you were of a science fiction fan or comics fan in Quebec at that time, you would have had access to all this tremendous French language comics, French and Belgian comics that were coming over from Europe, which is, that's, as we're seeing this summer with Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, or the Planet of a Thousand Cities, whatever it's called. There's an entire world of French language science fiction comics that are stunningly visually impressive that you can immerse yourself in. English language audiences don't have that, or at least they've got a language barrier.
Yeah, that does make sense, because French.
So if you're living in Quebec and you want to find this stuff, hey, I can find this. Look at this great stuff. I can read it.
Yeah.
Whereas you're finding Japanese stuff. Well, heck, I can't read that. I don't read Japanese. So maybe there was a little more incentive to stick with, what was in their native language.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just spitballing.
I think it's a good take on that. Like there isn't as imperative a need to go down the anime rabbit hole when you have access to like French and Belgian comics in your own language.
Exactly. Whereas if you are, it's 1980, 1982, and you want science fiction adventure that is aimed at a slightly older audience, you're gonna have to go to Japan for that in 1982.
Yeah.
Or The Thing.
Yeah. Obviously, there's only so much that we can theorize about this. I hope again that as we get more into French language stuff, we can reach more to that actual audience in Quebec through this show, and I hope we can have more people on who can bring more of add more to that perspective and sort of bridge that chasm. If I've done as much research as I can, I think we can paint a pretty reasonable picture. And of course, if I get anything wrong, or if you want to give me an earful, or you just want to help broaden the general perspective here, you can always hit me on Twitter at ZonInCanada or at JBetteridge. Email zonincanada@gmail.com. I'd really appreciate it. For now, we're just I think Albator / Captain Harlock is a good place to start. Dave, can you just kind of explain Captain Harlock in a nutshell to everyone?
Well, I think the best description of Captain Harlock came out of a fanzine I read in the mid-1980s, where they said Captain Harlock is a space pirate with a heart of gold and real punko looks. He's a character that's so visually iconic that I think even a blind person can see Captain Harlock and go, this guy is a space pirate. He's got an eye patch. He's got crazy big boots. He's got a cape. He's got crazy hair. He's got scars all over his body. And he's got both a Wild West sort of handgun and a sword that is also a gun. So don't be surprised when he shoots you with that sword, because it's also a gun.
People are always surprised when he does it, though.
They're always surprised. They're looking surprised. So the deal with Captain Harlock is that it's the year 2977 AD, and the planet Earth is just in a state of depression. The government is corrupt. No one's out there really getting anything done. Everyone's content to sit home and watch television. The government is keeping people satisfied by putting subliminals in the television series, which is always a fun little plot line they never quite work their way back around to, which is interesting. And there's
it paints an interesting picture to start.
It does. There's only a few people have decided they're not going to live like that, and one of those people is Captain Harlock. And because of his actions against the Earth government, he's been branded an outlaw. And he decided, if I'm going to be an outlaw, I'm going to be an outlaw. So together with 40 fellow space pirates, he flies around outer space in a space battleship that was built by his best friend. And in the course of his adventures, defying the corrupt Earth government, he finds out that the Earth is under danger of imminent invasion by a race of alien plant women from the Andromeda Galaxy, who used to live on Earth and since went out into the galaxy and now are coming back to take back their real estate.
So we're mainly talking about, what we're talking about here is the original Space Pirate Captain Harlock series from 1978. Captain Harlock is, of course, one of the most iconic anime characters who's ever been made, and there have been multiple interpretations of him over the years, in multiple series and movies and different types of adaptations. Basically, none of it fits together at all.
Please do not waste your time trying to fit these series together, because they just don't fit.
Yeah, there is no Leiji Matsumoto universe. None of this shit fits together perfectly. You just kind of have to appreciate every iteration on its own merits.
You've got to relax and let go, and just accept it.
Yeah, it doesn't fit together. We're focusing on the 1978 series. Actually, when Harlock was first adapted into French, which was less than a year after the series actually started airing in Japan in 1978, the series had not actually finished when they began the French language production. Harlock's name was changed to Albator, apparently due to concerns that children would somehow confuse him with Captain Haddock from Tintin.
See, I don't buy that explanation.
Yeah,
but
that's what you always hear. That's what you always hear. But they changed most of the characters' names.
They did. They changed most of the characters' names. My understanding, and I read this in an English language blog, was that the person who was in charge of localizing Captain Harlock for the French audience had a friend who really reminded him of Captain Harlock in that he was a groovy guy with hair or something. And this friend went by the name of Albatross.
Oh.
So he figured, well, I'll give Harlock a name that's kind of like the name of my friend, which is just a liberty you should not take with somebody else's cartoon character.
Yeah, almost all the characters' names were changed in the French version. That was standard practice back then. It goes beyond just this show itself. Of course, Harlock was Albator. Kei Yuki, who's the navigator and science officer aboard the Arcadia, the ship is called the Atlantis in French. Kei Yuki, who's the navigator and science officer, she's the bridge bunny, basically. Her name was changed to Nausicaa, which is one of the most surprising changes there, because this actually predates Nausicaa, the Valley of Wind, by several years.
It's from Homer's Odyssey, man.
Yeah. I understand
a literary reference.
It's a literary reference, but it's a fun coincidence nonetheless. Tadashi Daiba, who's the son of Professor Daiba, one of the few people on Earth who understood what was going on with the Mazone invasion and tried to warn the government and wound up getting killed. Tadashi's name was changed to Ramus Valente. Mime, who is the mouthless alien who is also aboard the Atlantis, her name was changed to Cleo. Yataran, who's the first mate, and when he's not focused on his job, is always building models of battleships. His name was changed to Alfred. Emeraldus was changed to Esmeralda. Tochiro Oyama, who is Harlock's
he's Harlock's best friend, and he's the engineer who built the Arcadia.
Yeah. He was actually the one character who retained his original name from the French version, Tochiro. Although in Albator, in the later series, Albator 84, his name was very confusingly changed to Alfred, even though he is not the same character as Yataran.
That's messed up.
Yeah. They made no effort. They made no attempt to try and sell you on the idea that he was the same character. It was just a really confusing localization choice, probably not made by the same company. At least in the 78 series, he retains his name, which is interesting because his Japanese heritage is pretty notable for reasons we'll get into a little later. And Queen Lafresia, who is the queen of the Mazone race, her name was changed to Sovidra, and the Mazone race are called the Sovidre in French. They're pretty extensive with the localization overall. Although it is I found it's, from what I've gathered, it is a fairly faithful dub. I mean, you can buy a DVD set right now that has the whole thing, the whole series, and it is original French dub. Despite the fact that it's edited, it's still intact enough that they can produce a fully bilingual uncut DVD.
When they the edits of Albator, were they edits for content or just for time?
Both, I believe. And I believe that the version that ran in France was slightly more edited than the version that ran in Quebec as well. But there were certainly content edits. I don't have access to that version, so I don't know exactly what was cut. I also read that in France they had to cut anime down for 20-minute slots a lot of the time because they would run for 20 minutes without any ad breaks. But again, I can't find a lot of clear information on that because again we have that big chasm between the English and French fandom, and it's kind of hard to exchange information a lot of the time, I find. Nonetheless, it's difficult to imagine the English language dub of any anime produced back in the late 70s or early 80s being used on an uncut DVD now, because usually there's just not enough footage to work with in those versions. But apparently that's in most French adaptations, it's intact enough that you can produce an uncut dub with it, which I find interesting.
Well, there is actually a lot of, if you're judicious with your editing, in especially a series like Captain Harlock, there are a lot of scenes where the Arcadia is just trucking from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And you could probably cut those out if you needed to cut those out without losing any important plot points. Yeah. And again, we're complaining about this dub of Albator, or the edits they made to Albator, whereas when that series aired in the United States as Captain Harlock and Queen of 1,000 Years, it was a crime what was done to the show. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Harmony Gold licensed Captain Harlock for broadcast, and they needed to fill 65 episodes, and Captain Harlock is only 42 episodes, So they also licensed the Queen Millennia television series, and they edited both of those shows together into a semi-coherent story where characters from one series would talk to characters from another series, and the two shows are supposedly happening at the same time, simultaneously. And it does not work at all. It's really schizophrenic television watching.
Yeah, and it didn't air they never got a full national syndication deal with that. I think it only aired in a handful of markets.
Well, I know we got it in Atlanta, which is where I saw it.
There are a few English language versions of Captain Harlock out there, but
well, the first version I saw was a weird home video release that Ziv International released in the early 80s. That was 4 episodes dubbed together, haphazardly dubbed, with a crazy Take to the Sky theme song. But anyway, we're talking about, I don't want to get off track.
But anyway, going back to the French Albator version, as we've made very clear, there are all these different versions of Captain Harlock that don't quite fit together. And this has also been the case in the French adaptations. The series we're talking about, the 1978 series, is often in French dubbed Albator 78. And that refers to the incomplete French dub of the original space pirate Captain Harlock series, which was directed by Rintaro and produced by Toei Animation in 1978. And it is known officially in French as Albator Les Corsaires de l'espace. This is the series that aired on Radio-Canada, the French language version of CBC. And there's also Albator 84. That refers to the 1982 Captain Harlock series, Arcadia of My Youth, Eternal Orbit SSX, which is in a completely different continuity from that 1978 series. And when that was released in French, it was simply under the title Albator, which obviously makes things very confusing. So that's why fans refer to it as Albator 84. Now, that did air in Canada, but my understanding is that it was on a premium station, like Super Écran, so it was seen by about 7 people. It didn't air in broadcast. Albator 84 was very prominent in France, not so much in Canada. Albator 2000 is the third sort of designation, and that actually refers to the final 3 episodes of the original Space Pirate Captain Harlock, which were not included in the original French dub of the series. As I mentioned before, Albator 78 is an incomplete dub, and it remained incomplete for almost 20 years.
I was going to say, when you say Albator 2000, was the entire series released in a format under that title?
It was not officially released under that title. That's just what the fans call it.
Okay.
They were first officially screened at the Fantasia Film Festival in Montreal in 2000. Again, 20 years, like people were kept hanging for 20 years. At least, or casual television watchers were kept hanging for almost 20 years. They had to wait almost as long for those final 3 episodes as we have had to wait for season 3 of Twin Peaks.
Wow.
And there were
except those episodes actually already existed.
They did exist, and many people had access to them for sure. But I mean, to the casual audience, the series just ended at episode 39, and there were some major problems with the adaptation of those final 3 episodes as well. We'll get into that later. But just looking at Albator 78 specifically, it actually made its debut in Quebec. The series was dubbed in France, but we got it first by a full 6 months. And it's worth noting that Albator himself was played by Richard Dubois, and he was an actor from Quebec. And Radio-Canada aired the series many times, over and over again. And in that time, since it first aired in 1979, it managed to become an ongoing social phenomenon for many years, at least to people who spoke French. It was completely under the radar for English speakers, because despite the fact that just about every Canadian home has access to Radio-Canada, if you didn't speak French, you would never even think to watch that station or check out or even become aware of the fact that Captain Harlock was airing on there. But if you mentioned Albator to any Gen Xer or older millennial from Quebec, chances are that they will have a bit of a gleam in their eye when they talk about it. The series had a huge impact. It led the way for a barrage of toys, memorabilia. Dave, you know about the special Radio-Canada branded pins that I'm pretty sure you had to mail in for, that had some very janky off-model drawings of the characters on them.
They're very off-model, yeah. I found a set of those, well, not a set, but 3 of those at Anime North a few years back, and got a Let's Anime blog post out of those buttons.
You'll find that a lot of the Albator merchandise was brought in from France. There were some children's picture books that, again, have these really funny looking renditions of the characters, and that was kind of a trend through a lot of that older Albator merchandise. But that stuff was really big for quite a while, based on that 1978 series, and there's also some public art. I have been told that there was a giant wall painting of Queen Emeraldis, at least until recently, on Ontario Street in Montreal. I don't know if it's still there. I'm trying to find a picture of it, but I'd love to see that, whether it's still there or not, because that's cool stuff right there.
Oh yeah. Last time we were in Montreal last summer, and we stopped by a restaurant called La Belle et la Bif. And in the men's room, there is a mural of Captain Harlock, or Albator if you prefer. And the women's room has a mural of Candy from Candy. Candace White Adley.
Yeah, and they have I read your account of that. They had a Goldorak burger as well.
They do have a Goldorak burger. It's very good.
I want to eat that, and hopefully I can make it to Montreal one day, and that'll be one of my first stops for sure. As I've suggested, Albator was just as big a phenomenon in France, and what I've gathered just combing some translations of French blogs, again, I don't speak French, so there's a cultural barrier that I'm processing everything through. A lot of fans in France have traditionally been envious of the French-Canadian broadcast. In addition to, getting a much later start over in France, the broadcast on Antenne 2 there apparently had additional edits on top of masters from the dubbing company that were already edited. And the decision to not translate the final 3 episodes was one made at the French broadcasting level. So overall, it's kind of a bit of a grass is greener, because, the version of Albator that aired on Radio Canada was certainly not unedited or anything like that. It's, kind of the same thing you'd see with a lot of anime aired on YTV versus on Cartoon Network. How sometimes Cartoon Network would make some additional edits that weren't in the YTV version. It's that kind of thing happening. But I think that a big thing in France is that when Albator 78 ended, it didn't really get a lot of repeat airings. Once Albator 84 hit, that sort of superseded everything and got a lot more attention, whereas that didn't happen in Canada, so Albator 78 got a lot more focus. And yes, Radio Canada did play the series over and over again for many years on and off, and reportedly, and I haven't actually gotten a confirmation of this, but at some point they apparently had managed to license the series in perpetuity, or at least that was the word on the street back in 2006, when the French version of Teletoon Retro was trying to get their hands on it and couldn't. And just imagine that, Teletoon actually trying to license anime. It really shows how popular how popular and how well remembered that show was among the French Canadian audience. Incidentally, it was that same year that Albator surfaced again on Radio Canada, almost as if Radio Canada was mocking Teletoon for not being able to get their hands on it. And I believe that is still the show's most recent airing. I don't think it's popped up again since then.
I do know that I'd noticed the Astro Boy in French airing on, I think it was Teletoon Retro. I think they got it.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, they did manage to get some stuff. They did get Goldorak at one point and ran that for a bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if they got their hands on some other stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of stuff came and went pretty quickly on that station. But anyway, that Radio Canada airing in 2006 was actually how I first saw it, and it was my first real substantial exposure to Captain Harlock. I checked it out of curiosity because people were talking about it on the old Zonen Canada forums back, when those were a thing. And at the time, I was still, young and naive and still somewhat dismissive of older stuff. And I also figured that anything airing on a public broadcaster in the middle of the day would be sanitized to the point that it was completely irrelevant. And oh boy, was I wrong. Because even with the language barrier, I could tell that this series was really sharply mature and dynamic and atmospheric in a way that I wasn't really used to seeing in anime localizations from that era.
You never can tell. You never can tell where the really great stuff is going to pop up.
Yeah. I mean, you just can't make assumptions like that. I have since learned that lesson for sure. One of the most distinctive things in this series is we mentioned the Mazone / Sylvedre race. When they are killed, they emit this horrifying high-pitched scream, and that is fully recreated in the French dub. And it leaves quite an impression on you. Admittedly, I still haven't seen a lot of the Harlock anime in full. I only recently finished the 1978 series because the whole thing is there, subtitled on Crunchyroll in English, and I highly recommend you check it out. It is a terrific show.
And you can buy there's a DVD set available from Discotek Media.
There is, and if you are okay with blind buying an older series, you cannot go wrong with this one.
Cannot go wrong.
It is one of the best you could pick up, especially out of Discotek. And while the series is a little rough looking compared to like Arcadia of my youth, I think I prefer the general look and design work in this show. I think Rintaro, when he's working, he's definitely the best when it comes to adapting Leiji Matsumoto stuff, and there's just something to the way he renders it visually that I think isn't quite captured in any of the other versions. There's like a solid consistency and stylization to it that I think is really strong. This series was definitely Toei Animation at the top of their game, at least as far as television animation goes.
It's a terrific looking show. It's got a lot of atmosphere. I love the character designs by Kazuo Komatsubara, who did character designs for this show and for a lot of other Matsumoto series in that time frame. Actually, a lot of anime. He did a lot of anime character designs.
Yeah, there's a lot of little differences in this compared to the other versions that you'll see. One is like the Arcadia itself. In this series, it has a dark blue look. In like Arcadia of my youth and a lot of the later versions, it has more of a green military look, and I definitely prefer the dark blue one. I think I'll take that one any day personally.
I find that I like them both. I don't want to have to be forced to choose between the two Arcadias. The blue one's got that, the switchblade that comes out the front, which is crazy. It's just nuts. The green Arcadia it's got a big skull right on the front that he uses to smash through things. They're both really entertaining ships. Both of them have the old sailing ship bridge stuck to the back, just to really drive it home that this is not a series you should be taking. You can't watch this show and expect scientific accuracy because it is a space fantasy. It's not meant to be taken as a future prediction.
Leiji Matsumoto, he really likes making his spaceships look like World War II battlecruisers.
World War II battlecruisers. Look at Emeraldus' ship, which is a giant blimp. What he's about, and you see this mostly in Galaxy Express, he's evoking a sense of nostalgia that might actually be for not only a time we didn't experience, but something that doesn't actually exist. And yet he's able to evoke that sense, which is actually quite a surprising feat when you think about it. Well, there's a real sadness, especially more so in Galaxy Express, I think, but Captain Harlock is full of people, full of characters who have deep regrets about their lives and question why they're doing what they're doing and what is the purpose of this. Yeah. Deep questions about their lives.
That actually brings me to I think probably the biggest criticism I have of the series is that you have all these characters that we mentioned before. They all have like really good backstories, and everyone gets an episode or two to sort of look at who they are and why they have committed themselves to Harlock's cause. I do find that after they've had that sort of moment, they tend to fade into the background. And
who's the character that we never get? We never get that realization or that revelation of his background is Captain Harlock himself.
Yeah, exactly.
And I actually believe that's a good thing. I don't believe we would ever, like, anything they could tell us would be an anticlimax. He is actually, and I've said this before, he's a character that works best. The more mysterious he is, the better he works. We don't need to know where the shadow came from. We don't need to know where Captain Harlock comes from, because it's better to not know. He's a fascinating character with that air of mystery. We really don't know where he came from, how old he is. And there have been further iterations of the character that have tried to sort of fill in those gaps, and I think those are less satisfying.
Yeah, I agree, especially Arcadia of my youth and Eternal Orbit SSX. It just kind of revels in filling that hole, and in a way, it does make Harlock feel like more of a vulnerable character.
Well, I feel like this series, the 78 series, he is tremendously vulnerable. In terms of Mayu.
Yeah.
And in terms of Shizuka Namino, the Maison spy, gets herself on board the Arcadia, and she comes really, really close to taking Harlock's life.
Yeah, but she does not succeed.
No.
There's this great bit with Namino in that series.
I like that phrase, Shizuka Namino, Maison Spy.
And she basically comes very close to seducing him and prying past his defenses. And there's just this one great shot. I think it's in episode 35 or 36 or something, where he just kind of throws her into the sick bay and walks away.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows how they really play up how important it is for Harlock / Albator to maintain this stoic badass personality. And it is a really delicate balance of how vulnerable do you want to make him? How much do we really want to know about him? Versus how much do we want him to just be sort of a mysterious, maybe not infallible, but
he needs to be an icon. He needs to be an icon.
Yeah. We see more of the stoic, mysterious, unflappable Harlock in this series than we do in other versions. You mentioned Mayu, and in the French version she's known as Stelly. And that actually brings me to one thing I wanted to bring up. So as far as I know, I haven't read the original Captain Harlock manga, but my understanding is that this series more or less follows the same plot. The
Harlock manga is almost like it reads like a treatment for the show that the 78 series would become. The bones are there, but it hasn't really been fleshed out.
Yeah.
And it's a Matsumoto comic, so there's lots and lots of full-page spreads with the Arcadia sitting in space and stuff. And the scripting for the 78 series is all over the map, but it does get where it's going eventually, Whereas the comic kind of loses interest in the whole thing. It kind of feels like he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. If you've seen Matsumoto's manga for Space Battleship Yamato, it does the same thing. It's like, well, we've kind of got a story, but I'm not really interested in that. I want to do this. It's really interesting.
I think in that regard, so the character of Mayu, who's known as Stelly in French, she is the daughter of Tochiro and Emeraldus, and she was not in the original manga.
No.
So she was actually added to the series. And I wanted to hear more of your take on that character, because I have read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, apparently Matsumoto resented her being introduced into the series, or she's often interpreted as being something to appeal to younger audiences, which I don't personally agree with. I think she adds a very needed and very necessary emotional element to the show overall.
She is the linchpin of the entire series. Without Mayu, there is no Captain Harlock 1978.
Which is why it blew my mind when I realized that she wasn't in the original manga.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't have, like, Tochiro and Emeraldus today are considered these two vital figures in the Harlock mythos. And Tochiro, it is revealed later that he is he's had his consciousness transplanted into the ship, so he's kind of there throughout the whole thing. And Emeraldus we see her in flashback.
Nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, she is
worst mom ever.
She is MIA completely. So Harlock had a close bond with both of those characters, and his commitment to visiting Mayu on Earth is sort of what we see playing out in that bond and connection. It's
my contention that Mayu is the only reason Captain Harlock is defending the planet Earth. Period. End of story. He made a promise to his friend, and he's going to keep that promise. And if that means he has to go to war with an entire race of intelligent plant women, then by golly, he is going to go to war with an entire race of intelligent plant women. That's my take on that character. That's why she's there.
Throughout the series, she's always playing. She has the ocarina that was given to her by Harlock, and she's always playing a song by it. And there's this fantastic scene where she's reunited with, the central computer on the Arcadia, which is her father, essentially, and she's playing the song in the ocarina, and it rolls into this greater song that's been kind of building up to throughout the series, and it's just such a beautiful moment. I think it was episode 34, probably my favorite episode in that series, because it kind of brought the whole Mayu and her parents' storyline together, and it's still kind of there in the French version. Obviously it's nowhere near as good, because not as much attention is given to the musical element of the show.
The French wrote some terrible, terrible music for Albator and kind of smeared it all over the show. And that's a crime, because the Space Pirate Captain Harlock has a tremendous soundtrack that I own on on CD and on vinyl. I really love that soundtrack. And especially like the Mayu's little ocarina segues into this tremendous orchestral piece. You get this amazing, like an overture. I still get cold chills every time I hear it. It's just a tremendous, tremendous soundtrack. There's another thing that makes that show terrific. But yeah, Mayu's in there playing the ocarina to a computer. And she's not even aware, right? Half the time she doesn't know because she's just a little kid.
Yeah.
But it's really tragic. It's amazingly tragic. You know, we talk about, you know, we like Japanese cartoons because they're more adult or whatever. But the truth is they're more melodramatic. And that's a melodrama that an American cartoon just would not touch. They would not go for the sad moment. They would go for the funny moment or the we blew up the enemy base moment, but they will not go for the sad moment. And that's Japanese animation will go for the tragedy every time.
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, it's a button they push, but it's a button that works.
Yeah, and I think that's a big reason why I like the dynamic of the absence of Emeraldus and Tochiro so much better. It just opens up to that longing and
exactly,
and emptiness, and it just allows for a moment like that. And I find it far more effective, and it also makes those characters more tantalizing themselves as well. Whereas in later iterations, we just, you know, they're in the crew and it's all Tochiro and Emeraldus all the time.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily bad because they're great characters, but this is like this dynamic I find is a lot more satisfying in a lot of ways.
I find Emeraldus is kind of a one-note character. Mm-hmm. You'll notice in the Emeraldus manga that who just put those out?
That was Kodansha, I think.
Yeah. They're terrific. You should go and buy them right now. Zach Davison translated them, did a great job. But there's another character, there's a youth character that she's sort of watching over, and both of their stories are sort of told concurrently. But you need another character to sort of that she can talk to, and that this other character looks up to Emeraldus as this legend. And this is how we see Captain Harlock. All the other characters look up to him as this mythical figure. And you'll see this when he appears in the Galaxy Express films as well. Captain Harlock is this... He's a figure on a wanted poster. You never expect to meet him in real life. And whoop, there he is, you know. Well, same with Emeraldus and Tochiro.
And, of course, if you're watching the English dub of that Galaxy Express 39 movie, he's voiced by Scott McNeil, which I think definitely the best English language portrayal we've seen of Captain Harlock. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Oh, I like the John Wayne Captain Harlock voice. Actually, I like that Roger Corman New World dub.
Yeah.
It's Maytel's voice is terrible in that, but everybody else, apart from the fake celebrity impersonation Captain Harlock voice, everyone else does a pretty good job. But I mean, there's only I got to go with. I mean, I'm a subtitle guy. I like Japanese dialogue. I'm a purist, I guess. I don't know. But you know, we're talking about Mayu as a character that wasn't in the manga, and you brought up General Kirita.
Kirita, yes, known as Vilac in the French version.
Vilac.
And I think there's quite a bit to talk about. Spoilers, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. In episode 39 is his tragic death, and that actually marks the end of the series in the French dub, and did so for 20 years. So I think he's definitely a character worth taking a look at.
And he goes out like a badass.
He sure does. That was another fantastic episode, and
I have it in my contract. That's how I die.
Yeah. Also, a character who was added in. There are some claims that Matsumoto also resented this character or didn't like his addition, which on one hand is kind of ridiculous because I think he's a very compelling character. On the other hand, I can kind of see that because the thing about Kirita is that he's like the one authority figure on Earth who is competent and kind of understands what's going on and catches on to the fact that the Earth is in danger. And, you know, he's sort of presented as the Zenigata to Harlock's.
Oh, exactly. Very much so.
That's very much the you don't see that dynamic play out in the series so much, but you know that's the idea behind his character, and he ultimately works with Harlock in the end and sacrifices himself to help to fight against the Mazone.
And he gets an episode where we learn his backstory and why he hates pirates so much. Yeah,
there's a lot going on with this character, and he's one of the linchpins in the TV series, and if Matsumoto did resent him, I think it's because possibly because he undermines this idea that the Earth government has just become completely hopeless and complacent. And
I will say one of my favorite characters is the Earth President. He's such a fun, 100% inept 1970s bureaucrat. Yeah. I just love that guy so much.
Yeah, he's always preoccupied with racetracks and getting new ones built and playing, portable golf in his office, and it's just all those stereotypical but fantastic touches.
I don't want to spoil the show, but at the end of the show, like the beginning of the show, he's hollering at people, he's smoking a cigarette, he's like, "I'm the president, do what I say, la 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 la." And at the end of the show, the city is in ruins, everything has been destroyed, and he's in his wrecked office. He's wearing rags, and he's like leaning back. He's like hollering at his underling. He's also wearing rags, and he just leans back with a cigarette and with this big smile on his face because he's still top dog,
Yeah.
It's like nothing is ever going to change for that guy.
I can't help but get the impression that the Earth government we see in this series is sort of representative of how Matsumoto views like Japan's post-war government.
Well, it's it's a lot of red tape.
Exactly, and of course Kirita, he undermines that. But I mean, I think he brings a much needed balance to the dynamic that we see there, and the exaggerated elements kind of work better because of him. So he did, but again, it is notable that the series in French ended at episode 39. So for casual viewers, for many years that this series played over and over again, his tragic, heroic, badass death in episode 39 marked the end of things. So in a way that kind of recontextualizes his character, or at least I would imagine that it did for audiences who never got to see those final 3 episodes. And I guess maybe we should touch on those final 3 episodes and why they didn't get why
That's
they
a
why
good
it took
question.
so long to get them dubbed. So we don't know the exact reason. Or I'm sure someone does. I don't know the exact reason, but having watched those episodes, it probably has a lot to do with the way the final conflict plays out. And there are a lot of titties in those final 3 episodes, and not a lot of ways that you can get around them. There's nothing too egregious in episode 40, the third last episode. In 41, we see the final showdown between Captain Harlock and Queen Lafretia, and the battle basically ends with him stripping her naked and cutting her breasts, and then the big revelation is that she bleeds red, whereas the other Mazone bleed like blue turquoise kind of color, with the revelation that she is in fact human. And I guess it's possible that they could have edited episodes together or found some way to edit around it, but the end result would have probably been completely incomprehensible if they had tried to do that.
It's still pretty incomprehensible.
Oh yeah.
Why is she a human? That doesn't make any sense to me.
When I watched that episode, I was trying to figure out.
I mean, the theory behind the Mazone is that they created human beings. Human beings were created to be their cattle. And then we just developed intelligence. I mean, that's the story of Captain Harlock. It's this mid-70s Von Daniken ancient astronauts, pyramids undersea nonsense that was all the rage. But if she's a human and she's leading the Mazone, did she create the Mazone, who in turn created humanity? It doesn't make any sense. I feel like there was a bunch of writers in the writer's room going, okay, we got to wrap this up. What are we going to do? And there's a lot of blank looks. And then they call Leiji Matsumoto. He's like, look, you guys put the little girl in there, and I didn't want you to do that, so you're on your own.
Yeah, it's definitely a confusing ending. They went for, I guess, kind of thematic shock over logic, but
I think it doesn't work on a logical level. It works on an emotional level.
It does, yeah.
Because Harlock would have easily killed her had she been a plant woman, but he's like, oh, you're a human. Well, I don't, he doesn't like killing people. He'll do it. It's really it's a weird ending. But I mean, the whole show is kind of weird. It's a weird show. It lurches between we're going to go to the Horsehead Nebula to we're going to cross the street. It's the year 2977, but people are still using 747s to fly from point A to point B. People still dress like it's 1977. There's not a real attempt to make it all fit together into a coherent whole.
Oh no!
And I kind of like that about it.
Yeah,
but it goes from Captain Harlock is like, well, we're going to go over to Mars, and it's a big, we're on Mars, and then the next episode, well, we're going to go 100 million light years away. It's the scale changes abruptly.
Yeah, but I mean, you won't find yourself questioning those things when you watch the show.
You do not.
Definitely. In fact, I think maybe that revelation at the end was the one moment where you get this baffling outcome. And yeah, as illogical as it is, I was thinking after I watched that episode, how could they have, made this appropriate for children's television in like France or Canada back in the late 70s or early 80s? And I couldn't think of a way, because you would cut out too much vital footage. It would just, you would lose the flow completely, or you'd have to
I think
sacrifice.
You would make that into a 40-episode television series,
yeah.
I think.
If in an English language adaptation, they would probably merge episodes together. I guess they were not as cool doing things that way with a French adaptation. I mean, it's not that
it was a lot more difficult to do that back then.
Yeah.
I mean, we have when they did Robotech, they had the advantage of having it wasn't digital editing, but it was tape. They were working off 3/4 inch tape or whatever, so it's a little easier. When they did Star Blazers in 1979, they were working off film. They were actually editing, I want to say 16 millimeter film prints of the show. So every edit they made, that was someone with a pair of scissors and some splicing tape. Every time they had to cover up a piece of Japanese text, they had to physically cover up that piece of Japanese text. And it's a lot more difficult to edit around things when you're working with analog, I guess you could say.
So, baffling as they were, these 3 episodes were just tossed aside. And I guess, especially after they moved on to Albator 84, I guess there just wasn't a perceived need to go back to it. And there were actually compilation movies released, definitely in Quebec, maybe in France as well, compiling Albator 78, that still left off those final 3 episodes for many years. So, as I mentioned earlier, Fantasia 2000 was where we saw they made a big deal about releasing the final 3 episodes, finally dubbed into French. So, first of all, almost everyone was recast in this version, except for Albator himself, who is, again, Richard Dubois, and he is very good. The general reception is that he has grown as an actor and gives in the performance everyone wanted from Albator after all those years. Everyone else was recast and is basically terrible. Even if I don't know if you had a chance to watch this version, Dave, but
not all of it.
Yeah, even if you don't speak French, you can look at the old dubbed episodes of Albator and look at these newer dubbed episodes, and there is clearly a difference in production quality between the two. You get wild inconsistency in the way things are handled in the 2000 dub.
Who dubbed it?
I don't know. I forgot to look.
I mean,
into
obviously it's not the same outfit that dubbed the original series.
No, it certainly wasn't. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same companies didn't even really exist anymore at that point, or if things had been reorganized.
Exactly.
So, I mean, someone else took the reins on it for sure. I mean, if you buy a DVD box set, it's all together and all edited according to the Japanese version anyway. So it's all they try to make it as seamless as possible. But these 3 episodes still stand out a lot, both in terms of the quality of the language production. Also, there's an interesting quirk in these episodes in that they actually, unlike the earlier series, they maintain the Japanese background music. Almost. There's one thing that keeps happening. They hired someone to do this Albator techno song. And they keep inserting it 3 to 4 times in each episode. It sounds like this. Yeah, and you get to hear that playing usually over very inappropriate moments over and over again throughout all these 3 episodes.
It sounds similar to the G-Force dub of Gatchaman that was done in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Where they had a Casio keyboard set on demo mode, and you would just hear this constant. There was not a moment of silence in the show. It was always like dun 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 for the entire 25 minutes of the show, which is infuriating. But the Albator 2000 situation sounds really similar to what happened when they dubbed the third series of Yamato. And they did not have access to the original Star Blazers cast. So they hired Peter Fernandez and his crew to dub the third series. So it's a completely different voice cast. And in some ways, I was down on it for a while, but I kind of like it now. The edits, like, they didn't edit nearly as much out of the third series as they did out of the first two.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, like, you know, you never can find the same people. You're always going to be working under different situations. It's a completely different crew of people working on this project. It's just another project to them.
Yeah.
They may not have even seen, I mean, obviously these people saw the original Albator, but they're not bound by this, you know, we have to replicate what happened in 1980, 1978, you know?
Yeah. Regardless, it's still kind of amazing that you can take those two dubs done separated by a 20-year period and, like, compile them together onto an uncut DVD set today, which is something is unthinkable with English language dubs. I don't think you ever really see that. Even you know, companies like Discotech, which endeavor to recover obscure English dubs and try to recompile them and make the best possible product with them. I don't think they could even pull this off with the types of materials you'd usually get from dubs made around that time.
Well,
so
I mean, the problem is that, like, a lot of times the original soundtracks just don't exist anymore.
No, exactly, yeah. And I mean these dubs also, because I think everything was done from scratch, like the music and the sound effects when they redid it back in 1979 and through the 80s. But it just kind of shows that there are definitely some differences in just the general methods of dubbing production in the two languages.
Oh, definitely.
For sure, yeah. So Captain Harlock was a big success both in France and Quebec. And a big reason is just largely due to the time and place in which it aired. A lot of shows hit around that time, and Harlock was easily the most engaging and sophisticated one, airing among its contemporaries when it was being brought over, and that's likely the biggest reason why it was such a phenomenon. I don't know if there's anything about the show that made it resonate specifically with a French-speaking audience. I don't know if you have any speculation on that. I'm drawing a blank, but I guess it's like you could just also pose the question: is there anything in Inuyasha that resonated strongly enough with an English-speaking Canadian audience to make it the number one, Google popular search query in 2004? There's probably no answer to that question.
I think Captain Harlock is a romantic character, and at heart, the Frenchman is a romantic.
I can see that.
Sound like a character of a 1950s novel, making broad generalizations of an entire culture. He's a romantic character in the Percy Bysshe Shelley concept of romance. You know, he's this enigmatic, dark, mysterious, colorful, swashbuckling. He's romantic.
And I have to say, I can't help but find it kind of ironic, given we touched on Matsumoto's politics before, and if you're not familiar with that, he is a huge apologist for the Axis powers during World War II, and he has a tendency to really show that in almost all of his work, probably less so in the 1978 Captain Harlock series. Do you have any thoughts on like how his politics influenced that series?
Don't have any heroes because they'll disappoint you, but... I don't know if you're familiar. There's a work he did called The Cockpit.
I am familiar with The Cockpit.
And there's a story in The Cockpit about the heroic German fighter pilot who is Captain Harlock, who has to deliver the atom bomb so that Germany can win the war. And he refuses because, quote, the nation that uses the atom bomb is the nation that sells its soul to the devil. Unquote. And I'm sorry, go screw yourself, Leiji Matsumoto. Go screw yourself for the... I'm sorry. I oppose that. A nation that bombed Warsaw flat, that bombed Rotterdam flat, that did its damnedest to bomb London flat. Come on, man. They would have used the atom bomb in 30 seconds, and they would have been cheering, and whoopie-doo, we used the atom bomb. Honestly, that sequence in The Cockpit.
The point is that I do think you even see subtle traces of it in this show. Like Harlock is of course of German descent, Tochiro is of Japanese descent, and their friendship is supposed to sort of be representative of the noble union between Japan and Germany Axis forces during World War II.
It worked out better in theory than in practice.
Yeah,
let me just say,
definitely, and which is why I found it that's why I found it interesting that Tochiro's Japanese heritage was maintained in the French version, which I don't think was intentional. But,
well, at the same time, I don't think you can infer like a strict nationalism to these characters, because Tochiro is a guy who could care less about. He's not like a Japanese bow down to the emperor kind of guy. And Harlock is like, I just happen to be doing this to pay the rent.
Yeah, that was
that
was his line in Arcadia of My Youth. Yeah,
exactly. He doesn't owe fealty to any government, and I feel like that's a really strong statement to make from someone who, you can't really say that he's a nationalist if he's opposing national governments. He's more of a nation state in this sort of vague cultural sense, sure, but I don't believe there's any one government he would ever think is better than any one other government.
Yeah.
I mean, Harlock himself is a character that has no use for governments. And in fact, this is a weakness of space pirate Captain Harlock, because he's not actually a space pirate. He doesn't actually do any of that stuff.
Yeah, you're more it's more kind of gliding off that imagery rather than exploring the actual actual nitty-gritty of
he does
piracy.
some looting. Yeah. Like we get to see him loot a spaceship in the first episode, but it's all towards the greater good. He's taking the grain and the useful stuff off that spaceship, destroying the wine and the jewels, and then he's taking it all to his he's got an asteroid, a secret asteroid, where he's storing all this grain against the day that Earth starves and needs it. Mm-hmm. Which is an important plot point. A pirate wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Also, just to clarify what we were talking about with Arcadia of My Youth, there is a segment in that movie that flashes back and demonstrates that Harlock and Tochiro's relationship goes back to their ancestors during World War II. And we see a whole segment of them, like, heroically escaping the French resistance fighters, and Tochiro gives Harlock's ancestor this site that winds up being an important, Nazi memorabilia winds up saving the day in Arcadia of My Youth, essentially.
It's Luftwaffe memorabilia.
Yeah, Luftwaffe. I know it's technically not Nazi when you're part of the Luftwaffe.
Those guys weren't party members.
Yeah, exactly. But it's worth noting that Arcadia of My Youth was actually incorporated into Albator 84, because Albator 84 is Endless Odyssey SSX was a continuation of that movie. Yeah. They actually edited Arcadia of My Youth into Albator 84, into 4 episodes. But they entirely cut out those flashback segments to Albator's ancestors.
Actually, when that film was released as Vengeance of the Space Pirate, those were cut as well.
That is not even remotely surprising.
And I don't blame it, because it doesn't work. It's kind of a nonsensical segment. I mean, using technology to look at the race memories of your ancestors, especially for a character like Captain Harlock, who is never shown so much as touching a woman, to expect that he had sired progeny throughout the ages. Come on. Mm-hmm. He's not about, a ladies' man. He's not.
Yeah.
He's just not a ladies' man.
And that also brings up the top, like, one of the things that really struck me in Harlock, and I'm not saying the series is inherently or deeply sexist or anything, but you see a lot of Matsumoto's issues with women arising in this series, I think, just by virtue of the fact that they're fighting the Mazone, who are presented as this race of women. And one thing that really struck me was that the moment that they try to garner sympathy for the Mazone is when you see the civilians, and you see that some actually take the form of men. They're not actually women, they're genderless, but most of them take the form of women. And it creates some, I wouldn't say troublesome imagery. I don't think it's really deeply bad or anything, but it's notable that aspect is kind of ingrained into the show.
I feel like any show where you have an episode where Captain Harlock and Tadashi Daiba are standing back to back, vaporizing hordes of attacking Amazon women.
Yeah.
that are bursting into flames and screaming. Somebody is working through something.
Yeah.
I don't know who. Somebody is working through some sort of powerful emotion with a scene like that.
Those Mazone screams, they will haunt you. They will stick with you for sure.
They're haunting.
Yeah.
There's some spooky stuff happening in this show. It's not afraid of it. It's not afraid to when Tadashi Daiba's when Dr. Daiba is murdered. He's murdered.
Oh, that is
it's
that was an amazing
scene.
death scene. They just loop him getting shot, like I think 5 or 6 times. It really creates a strong impression. I don't know if that was kept in the French dub or not. I wouldn't be surprised if they edited that out, but Rintaro knows how to direct the hell out of some death scenes. Let me tell you.
You can really see a lot of if you look at that film and you compare it to his later works like Dagger of Kamui and Harmageddon and the work he did at Metropolis, for that matter. He directed the Metropolis film. They're not like, at first glance, they may not seem a lot alike, but you can see that he's really working with like extreme contrast between light and shadow. He loves showing the beams of light going from way high to way low and like what's happening in between. He's just a tremendous director. And he wasn't really able to do a lot of the there's a short film, there's a film called Maney Maney that's a collection of short films. And Rintaro has a short in that. And his work in that is so bouncy and full of life, and it's really full animation, and he's not able to do a lot of that in Captain Harlock. But you can still see where he's working, it's coming through, his talent is really coming through.
Yeah, he has quite a varied and eclectic style. So when you watch multiple examples of his work, you're gonna see, he's gonna be flexing different muscles a lot of the time, depending on what the material calls for. A lot of Rintaro stuff isn't so great, but when he can find the right approach and the right voice to a certain kind of content, he can really do wonders with it.
I think I've enjoyed everything I've ever seen that he's done. I mean, I know Harmageddon gets a bad rap, but those people are idiots. That movie is terrific. If only for the destroyed, there's a gang of kids robbing jewelry stores in destroyed New York City. That scene is gold. It's just a gorgeous scene. And some people don't like Adieu Galaxy Express. I like Adieu Galaxy Express. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I like it.
Adieu Galaxy Express is one I still haven't seen yet. But
it's completely superfluous. You're like, why did I know why they made this movie. It's a great looking movie. It doesn't accomplish anything the first movie didn't accomplish, but there you go.
Some might say that everything Galaxy Express 39 outside of the first movie also directed by Rintaro is superfluous. Or rather, that first movie will give you pretty much everything you need from that franchise. But
it is everything you need, yeah. It's interesting that Captain Harlock shows up in the movie, and they have a sequence of episodes in the television series where Captain Harlock is supposedly showing up, and everyone's like, oh, it's Captain Harlock. Captain Harlock's going to do this. He's going to do that. And then it turns out it's a fake Captain Harlock, not the real Captain Harlock. And you see Captain Harlock, you see the Arcadia, like, in the corner of the screen in the last shot in the last episode in that sequence.
I'm actually not sure if Galaxy Express 39. I don't think that show was dubbed in French. I think that Captain Harlock is just the only real slice that they got of.
I think it made it into French. It made it to France, but much later.
Yeah.
I had to do a little research.
They got all the manga. I think they pretty much got all of his manga, which we're only getting now in English. Seven Seas just announced that they have the original Captain Harlock manga that they're releasing.
Yeah, I know.
This year. It's exciting.
On top of that.
Yeah, but for the animation stuff, not everything makes it over. And I mean, Galaxy Express 39 is a beast, no matter how you cut it down.
I feel like there's 113 episodes of that series, and you might not need to watch all of the series.
If you want to, it's not
essential. Not all of them.
No. Yeah.
There's some of them that are great though.
Yeah, but again, I mean that first movie, that first movie really does just boil down everything that you really need from the franchise.
And I think I mentioned this before, is that I think that's my favorite iteration of Captain Harlock, is his appearance in that film. Mm-hmm. Is he exists as this myth, and then Tetsuro gets to meet him.
Yeah.
And it's this, and he's just this big guy who's showing up to save the day, actually.
I think you mentioned that. We had to do 2 takes of the beginning part of this episode because there was a recording error. So if that comment wasn't in the version that I wound up using in this episode, that is why.
It's in there now.
Yeah.
And you get the 78 crew of the Arcadia, and they're in like the big Death's Head green Arcadia. So you get kind of this combination of iterations of Captain Harlock.
Again, you can't fit this stuff together. There is no Leiji Matsumoto universe.
You have to relax and enjoy it.
So that said, Albator still has quite a legacy in both French Canada and France. But I think we sort of touched on this idea earlier that it's kind of divorced from the modern anime fandom. Just what we've seen as detached observers.
It feels that way to me. Yes. Yeah.
And I just find that so surprising because I don't think that you would see something that something like Albator, which despite its edits and changes made in the French adaptation, it still retains so much of what is uniquely anime about it, or what we love about anime in terms of like atmosphere and horror and characterization, that is just so popular with such a wide audience that doesn't overlap with the anime fandom so much. Because if you go to like Otakuthon in Montreal, you're from what I understand, because I haven't been there, I'd like to go because it's supposed to be a fantastic convention. You see a lot of that popping up in cosplay and in merchandise, but it's disconnected from the modern industry kind of presence that, or should I say, I guess Crunchyroll is popular with kids in Quebec now, but like the audience that watches that stuff, you can't really trace that history back to this older Radio Canada.
There's not a direct line the way there is with the English language anime fandom.
Yeah,
which you can kind of trace a direct through line for that fandom from the mid 1970s until today. Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't believe and it may not be anything specific to Quebec. It may just be they just didn't have that history of not anime fandom but fandom in general of, we're going to have a fan club for the show. We're going to have this sci-fi convention. I mean, I don't know if their culture exists there.
Yeah, I don't think they really have an equivalent to like the Cartoon Fantasy Organization or anything like that.
That was an outgrowth of the LA Science Fiction Society. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where they would meet. So they had already had this template of, well, we'll have meetings, and we'll have a newsletter, we'll have screenings. That just may not have even existed. I don't know what science fiction fandom was like in the Francophone world.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic I'd like to explore more. But yeah, I think that a lot of the modern fandom stuff you see in Quebec, it can be traced back more to the English language stuff, which drives the modern market to some degree. Because
that's another question I have is do French language anime fans, do they fan sub in French?
I have talked to some people about this, and apparently, even though there's a lot of stuff in French on Crunchyroll. In fact, they even have some French-Canadian exclusives. I guess that's less true now that they're teaming up with Funimation and sharing their content. But for a while, a lot of Funimation stuff was available on Crunchyroll in Canada, but only in French. I apparently a lot of people in Quebec who speak French watch English subs on Crunchyroll. Because you hear a lot of talk about how Crunchyroll has kind of destroyed the whole fan sub community for better or worse, and I think that goes for different languages as well, because it's just so much easier, because English is such a universal language for so many people that it's just easier to watch the English language, the ubiquitous English language translation from Crunchyroll, whether on the site or from a rip that you acquired some other way.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So I might be a little off on that, and it's something I'd love to learn more about if anybody wants to reach out and talk to me more about it.
Well, I will say I have watched all of Future Boy Conan in Spanish. That was my first experience with that show. It was in Spanish, and I watched the entire show in Spanish. And Spanish, and it's a Romance language. It's close enough to English that you can pretty much figure out what's going on. So I can see where people would, with a high school or equivalent experience with English, could watch an English subtitle and pick up the story that way.
I think that's a neat way to experience something. I think.
Oh, definitely,
yeah.
definitely.
Having that extra cultural lens can definitely provide an interesting perspective and context. Like with me, watching with what I've seen of Captain Harlock in French, which isn't much, but I that makes it all the more fascinating to me.
When I was in Atlanta, me and some friends, we were part of a filmmaking group, and we fan subtitled Captain Harlock back in the day, and we used. Captain Harlock was broadcast with English subtitles on UHF television in California and Hawaii.
Back in the
70s. Yeah. So we had these really janky 150th generation episodes of Captain Harlock, and the subtitles are rudimentary at best. So my friend Matt used that as a template and was able to fill in the blanks to produce a much more comprehensive subtitled version that we distributed right up until, 2000, 2001, 2002. Yeah, we were sending those out.
And now you can just find the whole thing with comprehensive subtitles on Crunchyroll.
There was actually, I remember when Crunchyroll first started, it's just like, oh, you're stealing our subtitles. Like, no, they're not stealing our subtitles.
Yeah.
Relax. We don't own Captain Harlock, man.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we finish off, Dave?
I would like everyone to go and watch Space Pirate Captain Harlock, whether you watch it in French or you watch it in Japanese with English subtitles, or however you watch it. It's a terrific show. It's all over the map, but when it's good, it's really good.
Yeah. Just if you
and even when it's not, if you want to watch an episode where Captain Harlock rescues Maya from two Maison women dressed as what I can only describe in hooker wear, while two planets crash into each other behind him. That's a Rintaro episode.
That's another scene from my favorite episode 34. So
that's I cannot understand what's happening with their outfits. Those are just the nuttiest, sleaziest outfits for two characters that are not, in any way sexualized.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's one of the few moments in this show. It's like, wow, this is weird. This kind of sticks out because things don't usually like. Weird stuff happens all the time in this show, and you never question it. But then, you see those two twins kidnap Mayu, and it's like, wow, what were they thinking there?
Yeah, here's a tip: don't kidnap Mayu. Just leave her alone. Yeah, that's my advice.
Things aren't going to work out. All right, Dave. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I cannot overstate how much your perspective adds to this.
Well, I wish I knew more about how the show aired in France and in Quebec. And I wish I had more crazy Quebec stories, because it's a fascinating sphere of anime fandom that we here, without our French knowledge, don't know a lot about. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about that.
I hope that at the very least we can get our hands on some more janky looking merchandise, though.
100%. Love the janky merchandise.
Thanks for tuning in to Zonan Canada. As always, you can reach me on Twitter @ZonanCanada or email zonancanada@gmail.com. The theme song is by Ultraclystron and can be found on his album Packet Flood, which you can purchase at ultraclystron.com. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or on your podcast app of choice, and leave a rating or review if you have a chance. If you know anyone who might like this show, please recommend it to them. See you again!
Albator, tu brises le feu et la glace, Albator.